Steve, very good evening to you. How concerned are you at what the Metropolitan Police Commissioner said today? Because it presumably didn't come as a surprise to you.
Good evening, Iain. And it didn't. And if we sort of look into some of the figures perhaps first, that in July last year we had the annual attrition rate, and for the first time ever it was over the 9,000 mark. And the Metropolitan Police, again from memory, I think they annually lose around 2,000 officers through resignations, retirements, etc. So it is a worrying picture, because policing is a fantastic job. It can be very, very rewarding. However, there is a perception that if you turn on certainly news in the southeast, that every police officer appears to be corrupt and engaged in criminal activities, and that simply isn't the case. The vast majority of my members, you know, the cops that are out there every single day dealing with the public, our detectives doing the case files, do an amazing job and are honest and decent and want to do the best they can.
Well, I agree with you, and sometimes, when we cover unfortunate stories regarding with the police, there's always part of me that thinks, well, I don't want to give the impression that the whole of the police is like this. But on the other hand, you can't not report the various scandals that have happened, can you?
Of course, and it's only natural that people want to listen to the news to find out what's happening, but it just feels, certainly from speaking to colleagues in the service at the moment, but talking to people who thought about joining the police, when they have a constant barrage of, if that's what policing's about, I don't want to join or be part of it, because they can't feel they can make effective changes, then they're going to be dissuaded and they want to go to other forms of employment with less risk, less harm, less threat, perhaps a better work-life balance, because policing isn't for everybody. It is quite a unique skill set to have. I've likened it sometimes to being a bit of a contact sport from the front line, because it can be very, very physical. It's become increasingly complex, and that constant drip of negative stories, it needs to be offset by some positive stories of the great work that's done every single day. That's what we need, but obviously it appears that good news doesn't always make the news as often as the bad news does.
I can honestly say that in 14 years on LBC, I have never had a contact from the police or a press release to say, look, we've done this brilliant thing here, we'd love to talk to you about it. It just doesn't happen.
I'll try and get my comms team to be in touch, Iain, and perhaps next time we have our show, we can talk about the good things in policing.
Well, I would love to do that, because I know fantastic things happen in every police force around the country, and it is a crying shame that the reporting of policing does at the moment tend to be quite negative. But Trevor Phillips was saying on Cross Question earlier that he thought that policing had become a bit like nursing, become a graduate profession, and there's a huge number of really competent people have effectively been banned, well, not banned, but they've been put off from joining the police because they haven't got a degree. And you and I will know many people who haven't got degrees that would make absolutely ideal police officers.
Absolutely, and there are still two ways into policing. You can either have a degree to come into policing and go in one route. You can join the police to obtain a degree, or indeed there is still an avenue to come in to not do any kind of, to have a degree or to obtain a degree and come in that way. So those options are still available, and policing is a very broad church. We need lots of different skills, and it's important that people realise that there are some amazing opportunities within policing, and it's with that I'd encourage anyone to have a look, have a try. We do know that when people first join, the highest attrition rate is in the first 12 months, because that's the reality of perhaps trying to do the police learning and operational policing. Some people quite honestly say, it's not for me, it's not what I expected, but it's then leaving with thanks for trying, because unless you try something, you never know. And then we'll probably see the next attrition dropping off between the 5 and 7 year point, because people are at the top of the pay scale then, certainly as a police constable, and they will perhaps look for other options if policing isn't for them. So we're trying to learn a lot from the people that leave the service under the National Leavers Framework. There's more work to be done around that to fully understand why, and it's about making sure we understand the data to try and put those things in place to retain but also to recruit police officers.
How much effort is put into going into schools and talking to careers teachers and also in universities? Because there'll be a lot of people, I imagine, who've never thought about going into the police, but if you put the thought in their heads, and that's partly what this hour is about, because I do want to put the thought in people's heads, then if you put it into their heads, then they might seriously think about it, or at least think about looking into it.
Absolutely, and for me it's those skills involvement, the skills liaison officers. They should be portraying the positive side of policing, They're there not just to deal with some of the perhaps negative aspects of what's happening in schools or colleges, universities, but to be the positive role model to talk about the job they do. Certainly from my time on the on response vehicles, if we ever had opportunities to engage with the local community near schools or colleges, it was a great chance to speak to people. Quite often, the kids would know more about some of the guns and kit that we had through playing the computer games, and it was a good talking point. And it's hopefully trying to portray that role model behaviour to offset some of the negativity, which can play a crucial role in recruiting people in. But of course, it's sometimes we need older people to come in as well with more experience. If that financial package isn't enough to make them switch over from their current employment because they've got family and mortgages, we are missing out on a vital area of good experience, life experience that would be so useful in policing.
And what's the top age for joining the police?
Good question. I think now because of the pension changes, 60, 65. I've never actually thought about the top age at the moment, because it used to be that you could be eligible to retirement at 60 unless you're a senior ranking officer, then you can have extensions. There are physical aspects of the job that you would have to pass initially to get round it, so I'd like to think that test could be achieved by someone reasonably fit. However, I think it's open to maximum retirement age.
Well, the Met website apparently says it says typically, I'm not sure what that means. The upper age limit is 57, so my policing days are well and truly over, but I couldn't do it with my hip, could I, anyway? So I think I'll have to think of an alternative. But I talked about the traditional view of policing with the sort of bobby on the beat, wearing the helmet and all the rest of it. But there are so many different aspects to policing nowadays, aren't there, that, again, people may not be particularly familiar with.
That's right. There is so many different roles. It's a bit like joining the military. There's so many aspects in that. But becoming a police officer, you can start off in uniform, you can start as a detective, because there's different pathways into policing now, which were never there before. But there's so many different aspects of the crime. It's become increasingly complex, with 40% of crime being online and cyber fraud. There's financial investigations to take place. There's the murder investigations. There's dealing with the sexual offences. Even neighbourhood policing is a specialty in itself when you look at the stakeholder engagement, dealing with schools, dealing with the public, problem-orientated policing. There's so much to go on there, but what we can't ever do is drop the standards of what we need for police officers, because it is changing every single time. We need to make sure we retain the standard that we need and then provide that continuous education around powers, policies, laws, legislation. Tell officers where they're going wrong, help them, and then we might retain more in the first place.
Steve, thank you very much for joining us. That's Steve Hartshorn, Chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales.